On behalf of Friends of Downtown Eugene, we would like to thank you and welcome you to the Downtown Athletic Club. My name is Rob Bennett. I'm a board member of Downtown Eugene, Inc., and I'm the chair of Friends of Downtown Eugene. Joe Minicozzi is here today, along with his colleague, Josh McCarty, who helped him put together this presentation for today. But before we make a formal introduction for Joe, I'd like to take just a moment and acknowledge the different organizations that are a part of Friends of Downtown Eugene. The Downtown Eugene, Inc., the Technology Association of Oregon, the Eugene Chamber, the Downtown Neighborhood Association, and the Downtown Eugene Merchants. We are a coalition of organizations that have joined together to create a safe and welcoming downtown. We meet weekly and work on proactive solutions to make downtown a safe and welcoming environment for all segments of the community. Joe Minicozzi is an urban planner imagining new ways to think about and visualize land use, urban design, and economics. Joe founded Urban 3 to explain and visualize market dynamics created by tax and land use policies. Urban 3's work establishes new conversations across multiple professional sectors, policymakers, and the public to creatively address the challenges of urbanization. Urban 3's extensive studies range geographically over 30 states, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Joe holds a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Miami and a Master's of Architecture and Urban Design from Harvard University. In 2017, Joe was recognized as one of the 100 most influential urbanists of all time. We are very pleased to have Joe here today. So without further ado, the Downtown Athletic Club and the Friends of Downtown Eugene are excited to introduce Joe Minicozzi.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being part of this and getting into some nerdy stuff with me today. Before I get into this, I just want to thank you all. The Design Excellence Board, I was talking with Karen about this. Y'all had me here in this room in 2015 to do a talk. So it was more of a presentation to talk about the theory of all of this stuff, and your city has actually gone so far as to do the analysis themselves, but then have us come back and do this full analysis. So, back then I started a presentation with this same thing, and I'll start it here. If there's one way to think about cities, your community, think about Eugene, think about where you came from, think about any place. I tend to think about it like a DNA, like this is how I started my life, and this is where I'm going, right? There's not a lot I can do. I used to have hair back then, but I'm going to be my grandfather whether I like it or not, right? You all do this, or more importantly, I look at this guy, my dad. So I see my family. I'm genetically Italian. I can't change that. There's things about that make me who I am. I wave my hands around a lot when I talk. But we also have a genetic predisposition to heart disease. My dad has had a 7 bypass heart surgery. Like, what do you call that? Septuple? But I know that that's in me, so I have to make conscious choices as I grow to balance myself, right? I have to be aware of that stuff. So as your city grows, have a good model about who you are, where you're going, how to grow, and have good bones, but also realize and learn from the mistakes of places. These are all just collections of people operating in space. When I first started doing this stuff in 2009, I was actually speaking at a Smart Growth conference, and I stood in the room with this image. And it's a quote from Mark Twain: "A person who won't read has no advantage over one who can't read." Just a show of hands, who's read your measures on your tax policies and understands how they work? Anyone? Got a couple people. So if you don't understand the financial system that's baked in your tax policies, you don't understand what you're doing from a community design standpoint. There's a suburban bias baked into our tax policies. This is what we're dealing with. This is what every American city is dealing with. And we tend to talk about things with heuristics and biases, but not with facts. It's how we feel about something or what we think something is, but with no data. So I'm from Asheville. Actually, a colleague of mine, Harry Weiss, is here from Medford. We work together in Asheville. I don't know if y'all know Asheville. It's beautiful setting, Blue Ridge Mountains, Blue Ridge Parkway, bluegrass music. We're 90,000 people. We have 40 breweries. We drink a lot. We got about like 2,000 people per brewery if you want to do the math on that. And like any quirky little mountain town, we have men dressed as nuns on tall bikes that eat fire. It's your typical little place. Well, Asheville didn't start that way. This is how Asheville started. In the 1800s, this is a shot down Main Street. About 20 or so years later after this picture, this is the same location. Asheville exploded. We look back at Asheville and see this beauty and see this place, and we're like, we want to get back there. But we don't understand like how rapidly we're changing at that point. We had the second streetcar line in the entire country. Presidents came to visit. Presidents still visit, although we're probably not going to get this one, and we're okay with that. But we grew at 20% in population every year of the decade of the 1920s. We were the second largest city in North Carolina. A lot of people don't realize that. Asheville was the only city that was bigger than Asheville was Winston-Salem. In that process, we achieved the highest debt per capita of the entire United States. We're number one. And when the Depression hit and our books were audited, we thought we had $5 million in the bank. It turned out we had $18,000 in the bank. Little clerical error there. Our entire city council was indicted and the mayor committed suicide. That's leadership. That's how we entered the Depression. So, Thomas Wolfe, famous American author of the book Look Homeward Angel, this is what he wrote in a book about Asheville. Now, in the book, he calls it Altamont, but he says, Asheville has squandered fabulous sums. They flung away the earnings of a lifetime. They have mortgaged those of a generation to come. They have ruined a city, and in doing so, they've ruined themselves, their children, and their children's children. That's a hell of a thing to say about your hometown, right? Now, I don't know if y'all ever spent time in the South. We generally don't speak this openly with each other. It's called being ugly. He was threatened. His family was threatened. His second book was called You Can't Go Home Again, for obvious reasons. And it's a true story about Asheville. Asheville is seen as a very liberal place. We're actually very conservative. It took us until we took out these debts and we actually chose to pay them off. We didn't take part of the New Deal program to bond them out, or to absolve the bond. And this is the burning of the last bond payment in 1976. You get these three guys to burn it. There's Miss Asheville with her tiara. Here's Billy Graham. When Billy shows up, it's a big deal. But check it out. It's the third headline in the paper. We were so embarrassed about that debt. But when we got out of debt, what did we start doing? We started cooking with gas. We did what everybody else did. We built highways from the north side to downtown, which became the Crosstown Expressway. And the coup de grace is blowing the mountain open and creating Bowcatcher Cut. I love that it's on a postcard. Isn't that awesome? Come visit our cut. Why don't y'all climb the wall or something? The community actually fought this and proved to DOT that you could do a tunnel cheaper. And DOT's like, well, we don't have the technology how to do a tunnel. Everybody's like, look, there's a tunnel right there. Like that's only like 150 yards away. Come on now. But on the other side of the cut, the mall happened and our downtown died. So when people talk about downtown Asheville, they don't remember this one. And this is shots from the 1990s. That's, just blow off a cannon down Main Street and you won't hit anybody. We were essentially too poor to tear anything down, which was the saving grace of our community. But the children's children had a bias about what urbanism was. Anytime somebody tried to fix downtown or work in downtown or do anything, those children's children would rise up. That's not who we are. We're rural mountain people. We don't need any of that big city stuff, right? Do y'all have people like that? Every community I go to, it's people that have their biases about what cities are, and they don't understand them at an economic or architectural level. They don't understand the urbanism. So Harry and I worked for a company, Public Interest Projects, which is a for-profit real estate development company based in Asheville, funded by Julian Price. 75% of the money went into sticks and bricks, 25% went into starting businesses. So it was about fixing buildings and cultivating a new growth in our downtown, rehabbing things, doing buildings like this and fixing it. Real rocket science. But the real secret behind what we were doing was also communicating and talking and bringing information to the community. It was all about the data of what was happening in our community. That yes, we're real estate developers, but it's good for you too. It's good for our community to have these buildings get fixed. So what was going on in our city at that time, this is the value of downtown as a portfolio. So our downtown was worth $100 million in 1991. We're a $15 million investor sitting inside that portfolio, right? Y'all follow me? These buildings are worth something. Just by fixing up the buildings that were sitting there boarded up, this is what happened. We didn't get a new building in downtown Asheville until 2008. So that's the value of historic preservation. That's the value of the stuff that was sitting there in your portfolio. Now, to show you that it's not all love and roses in Asheville, these are some campaign ads from the 90s. It's from Chris Peterson. Chris is a riot. Here's Chris complaining about, like, look at this poor guy's crying, right? $26 million of parking garages and streetscape projects in downtown. Downtown development for bureaucrats instead of water, sewer, streets for our citizens. Okay, Chris has a point. $26 million is a lot of money. So let's do some math. If you invest $26 million on a $100 million asset and it grows to $500 million, is investing 26 and yielding $430 million, is that a good return on investment? Yeah. Why do we listen to Chris? If Chris is entitled to his opinion, he's not entitled to facts. So put the facts out there, and you're not going to stop Chris. Chris has a website now with fire and brimstone. He misspelled charlatans. This is our mayor, and I asked the mayor, I'm like, is that a liquor drink? She goes, it should be. You know, it's just whatever. You know, everybody's entitled to their stuff, but you got to have facts at the table to talk about stuff. And what we've learned in this process is we lost a way to have a civic dialogue. This is a kid's book that I found in a garage sale, The City, the Town, and the Country, Teacher's Guide, right? 1959, third grade textbook. So in kindergarten, you learn about your house, first grade the school, second grade the neighborhood, third grade you learn about regional planning. Did y'all do that? So in the Teacher's Guide, this is a lesson for you, the teacher, to work with your students. While patterns vary from state to state, counties are responsible for education, library, health, welfare, etc. In studying the functions performed by your county, you will no doubt find there is a duplication of services, an overlapping of jurisdictions, and a lack of coordination between the county and the city. Did y'all have that problem? 1959. Here's the lesson plan. It's painfully white. It's also misogynistic. The girls are shoved out in the hallway for some reason. But you learn about this factory that gets built. There's even more kids that go to school. And so you ask your third graders this question in blue right here. Give 4 good reasons for building a new school. And your third graders talk about what? Equity. Everybody should have a desk, right? Maybe get another teacher. Split the class in 2. Build a little expansion on the school. Infrastructure, right? Things we need. On the right-hand page, you learn about Mr. Canfield, who said, we don't want a new school. If we build a new school, our taxes are too high, we'll need more teachers and everything else, and our taxes will go up yet again, right? That is indeed true. And you ask your third graders, why would some people have to pay higher taxes if a new school were built? Why are some people against paying higher taxes? Do you see what's going on here, folks? On 2 pages of text, we get both sides of the argument, and third graders get to have a civic conversation about it. City after city I go to, people take one side, one page, and they stand on it without seeing another side or having an honest conversation about the data. Third graders can solve this. We need to rise up to this level of civic conversation. What you find in this text is that, y'all got quiet. Am I like offending you all or anything? Is it good? Are we good? Not too nerdy? Okay. We have this in this text here. Remember too that children, whether urban and rural, regardless of region, are tragically limited in their knowledge of the world, and their world's largely a space in which to live and operate. We don't see how we're all connected. We don't see how all this stuff relates. So, why? If we're a real estate developer that's worth $15 million, what's my city worth? What's your city worth? So if you look up the word incorporate in the Oxford Dictionary, look what it says. To constitute a company, a city, or other organization is a legal corporation. Eugene is a corporation. So is your county, so is your state, so is our country. Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert Show a couple years ago, and it's midnight, and I'm like, of course, like Googling this immediately, but here it is. The United States is the largest corporation in the world. This is the code for any legal nerds in the audience. There it is if you want to look it up. We are a federal corporation. That's not to say we're a capitalistic corporation, we're a social corporation. We have to work together, but there needs to be a cash flow to understand this stuff. So, my city at $13 billion is 6 times the value of Ted Turner. Does my council behave like CNN? Does Ted Turner do the opposite? Does Ted Turner look at Facebook every single day and make his decisions? No. So why don't we have a level of conversation and discourse so that we all know as shareholders what's going on? So my city has a finite boundary of land. All those acres are really specific. We need to understand what they are. So if you look at the land, like a farmer looks at land, and see the buildings as crops, you could see your city a little bit differently. So when we talk to farmers, they're always talking in economic models, crop yield per acre, water per acre, all that stuff. Do the same with the city. So here's a building that the Public Interest Project's renovated, ground story retail, second floor office, upper story residential. This is the streetscape project that the city did. So thank you, city, for the garbage can, the bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree. We didn't pay for that. That's a subsidy in front of that building, right? That's the way that Chris sees it. Fair enough. But the taxes on this property went from $300,000 value or tax value to $11 million. So the taxes shot up 3,500%. Did y'all follow me? That's the investment my community gets. That's the taxes y'all get. Go out and buy 3,500% more garbage cans. Whatever, we don't care. This is building your community's wealth. And people are like, well, Joe, that's not fair. There's this Walmart over here that's 20 million. Fair enough. But that Walmart took 34 acres to make happen inside of my corporation. This building's on 0.2 acres. Per acre, what's the yield of taxes? Well, this is what that looks like. That's the property taxes. For you all in Oregon, this is where it stops. This is all you get. In Asheville, people are like, well, what about retail taxes? Okay, who would have thought that that building is producing double the retail taxes of a Walmart? It is. Residents, we got 90 units of residential per acre. That's good. Jobs, we got a lot more jobs. So the data is there to show you why we built cities this way for tens of thousands of years. Excuse me. Some people say to me, they're like, Joe, what's your problem? Why do you hate Walmart? If that's what your takeaway is, you're missing the point. I presented at the, sorry, I've got an Oregon joke here. If you could grow something, what would you grow? So some of you saw that. You know, you get the joke. But I presented at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers conference a few years ago, which makes a planning conference feel like Burning Man by comparison. This is the Squares conference. Tax assessors are awesome, but they're not the most dynamic conference to go to. But 3,000 assessors are in the room. This guy was the keynote address at 8 in the morning, presenting spreadsheet after spreadsheet on how cheap his buildings are. I'm in the back of the room drinking my coffee going, this is brilliant. This guy's getting all of his property taxes lowered in one meeting. That's efficient. Assessors are agnostic. If it's a crappy throwaway building, it's a crappy throwaway building. You cannot make more value there. So thank you for your spreadsheets. We're going to lower your tax bills. Now, I'm in the back of the room having a coronary because I'm trained as an architect. I'm like, why does no one care? Why would they just let somebody come in and pay low taxes without running the cost side of it? And so I went up to the microphone and I asked him, I said, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he said, 15 years, maybe 20. We designed the building to depreciate as fast as possible, maximize the depreciation, build another building, and depreciate it down again. The buildings are throwaway for us. That's their commitment to your corporation. Don't hate the player, hate the game. When you have a tax system based on value, there's a perverse incentive for me as an investor to make the lowest investment possible in your corporation, and you reward me with that. That's how the system works. Work with it. Or at least analyze, is this 15-year commitment good for us? Is a 15-year investment good for us? Is the life cycle of a cat good for us? I'm a dog person, sorry cat people, but this is how long it's going to stay in your portfolio. And that's just the city side. We have a very hostile relationship with our county brothers and sisters. There's 2 voters out in the county for every 1 voter in the city, so they're constantly attacking our downtown and our city. But this is the average city voter and what they pay in county taxes versus the average county voter and what they pay in county taxes. So it's a thank you card for that, thanks. Here's the mall and here's our building downtown. So what's good for Main Street is great for the city, but it's unbelievable for the county. It builds wealth for the county. So I breezed through a lot of math here, and what I'm doing is getting you into, it's not anything complicated, don't overthink this, it's just efficiency analysis. When we talk about cars, we don't talk about cars on a miles per tank basis, do we? If we did, we'd all be driving Ford F-150s. You'd say to me, Joe, that's stupid. All tanks are different sizes. We say miles per gallon. That's efficiency. Okay, when we say that, the numbers change, and we should all be driving BMW Asettas at 70 miles per gallon. That is actually more efficient than a Prius. It's also more dangerous. If you have a head-on that thing, you're stuck in it. But whatever. So if we can see the data this way, if we can do the analysis, I can show you like what's going on in your brain with computer models. Can I do an economic MRI of your city? So back to Asheville for a second. Here's my county. I've got non-taxable in gray, so that's a big park. I've got low value in green. That's low value real estate. High value in purple. That's the Biltmore Estate right there. The Biltmore Estate is the largest house in the country. Their house is worth $100 million. When Bill Cecil shows up at a council meeting, everybody genuflects. and thanks him for his time. But it's really not fair from a representational standpoint about the productivity of that parcel. His house is a 180,000 square foot house on 2,000 acres of land. Anybody have a 180,000 square foot house? Of course not. So he's got the biggest gas tank. So rather than total value, here's value per acre. I'll just show it to you in 3D. Anybody want to guess where downtown Asheville is? Boom. We don't even have to label it. And we can see our little sister of Black Mountain. We can see its main street right there. That's 10 miles away. The urban form shows us what's going on financially as well, or vice versa. The financial model is showing us what's going on with urbanism. So we see weird stuff. I'm just going to show one example before we get into Eugene. This is one of my favorites, and I figured this would be good for you all. West Palm Beach, Florida. You can tell where the ocean is. But things like this. Lots of times people say to us, Joe, if you're just going about money, you just want skyscrapers everywhere. You just want tall buildings. It's like, no, that's not the point. I need you to see information and think critically about what you're doing. So these are two buildings 2 blocks away from each other in West Palm Beach. This 3-story building, 1, 2, 3, is worth $10.5 million an acre. 2 blocks away is a skyscraper worth $9.2 million an acre. So from a productivity standpoint, that is more productive than this. Design and value and density are all part of the quotient. So be aware of that. Get past your biases and think about things. And, it's Palm Beach, so we said, what the hell, let's just grab all Donald Trump's real estate. So the Donald is pulling about $400,000 of value per acre, right? You follow me? Which is less productive than the poor African-American neighborhood, these shotgun shacks. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Why is it that we tax our poorest people the most? When I showed this to council, I was like, 3 of these buildings are boarded up. These 3 were condemned. They're still paying more taxes per acre than this guy. And one of the commissioners said to me, he goes, well, that's not right. I said, correct. Get into the numbers. Don't be afraid of this stuff. See what's going on. So for you all, your city did this in 2014, or 17. They ran the numbers, and it works out the same for y'all. So your city has this awesome document with here's your total taxable value, here's your value per acre, and you see it flip from the total value to the value per acre. The model changes, the data sees differently. And you also did this, which is pretty cool. Here's the 12-acre big box stuff and its value. On that same 12 acres, you could fit this many 29 downtown buildings, which would be that value. Think about how to cultivate your wealth so you can pay for the things you need to support your community. Affordable housing, artist program, drug counseling, homeless shelters, whatever you need, you have to pay for it. So here's your model. You can see where your downtown is. It's killing it. So if that's the revenue side, what about this stuff? Now, we didn't get into things like police services, the soft stuff, because really that's a service and not the physical stuff. When you look at your bills, your roads and pipes are your expensive stuff. Your community has already adopted some great strategies with your long-term sustainable budget, being able to pay for things over time, and being transparent about it. So your revenues. First, let's get through the numbers of this real quick. Your county is about 60% non-taxable. It is what it is. So the green stuff is what's paying the taxes. Your city urban growth boundary is about 24% non-taxable. When you get into just what you can control, it's about 27%. This is about average for what we see for cities, particularly that have a large university. Chapel Hill is, 60% non-taxable. So it's much worse situation than you all. Your downtown's at 36% non-taxable. So this is all about maintaining that public good as a part of your corporation. Be mindful of that. So your city is a shareholder of the county, right? So y'all are Lane County taxpayers. You're about 1.5% of the footprint of the county. You're producing 32% of the county's property taxes. That's pretty good. Actually, it's really good. You're a 1:31 ratio of productivity for the county. You're producing tremendous amounts of wealth for your county, which is great. Your downtown is a piece of the city, is about 0.8% of the footprint. It's about 3% of the value. It's a 1-to-4 ratio. That's actually a little bit on the low side for a lot of downtowns that we see that are as healthy as yours is. But it's also a sign that your housing is really valuable too. So it's going to make it difficult to compete there. But your downtown, let's not forget, is a piece of the county. Your downtown barely shows up on the pie chart. What do you call that? Like 1/100,000th of a percent or something like that? And this is its potency. Those may not look big when you look at them just as pie charts, but when you run the math on it, it's a 1 to 118 ratio of productivity. Pound for pound, dollar for dollar, your county needs to be all over helping your downtown grow up. And perhaps they are. But just be mindful of that this is a good return on investment for them. So back to your city for a second. We're going to come to the end of this. Now, as you unpack your city, the easiest way that we look at it is the ingredients that make up your city. So you have the ingredients of housing, low, medium, and high. Mixed use, low, medium, and high density. And commercial, low, medium, and high density. We'll come back to this. We call this the Brady Bunch slide, but this is like your family of who you are. You have some fun measures. You put them in place. These were voter-driven initiatives. Thanks, guys. You're not alone in this. The habit started in California with Prop 13, and it spread like wildfire across the country. There's a great colonial barb that we used to say back to our mom in England, which was, "Don't tax me, don't tax thee, tax the fellow behind the tree." We're a country of tax evaders, folks. We started a revolution over a tax. We don't like paying taxes. So people adopt these measures. Well, there's a problem. There's a distortion. So we'll show it to you. So here's the Chamber of Commerce property here. You see three numbers. There's the real market value, the assessed value, and the taxable value, right? That's all we care about is how you cash flow. So the only thing we really care about is that taxable value. Well, now what happens in the marketplace, because you've constricted your value, is this. So let's take a look at that gap for a second. So here's what the real world is doing for prices, right? That's the real market value. Here is where your revenue is. What happens when the market takes off in real world? Price of lumber, what happens? Goes up, follows that chart. Price of gasoline, price of labor, price of concrete, all follows that blue line. What happens with your revenue? Follows the red line. So when you have this happen, all of a sudden you can't afford your city anymore. Because if your city has to go out and pay for concrete or asphalt or a tree, it's going to pay market prices, but your revenue is constricted. This is just what y'all have done to yourself. So basically we made three models to show you what they look like. Here's what your market's doing, here's what your assessed is doing, here's what your taxable. So there's an $11 billion difference between your value where it should be and where it's being capped for your cash flow for your counselors. So your counselors have a limited budget to play with all the things that you want to build as a community. Or another way of thinking of this, you've essentially thrown $30 million back to the taxpayers as a savings, but your city still needs that function. Y'all follow me? Is this too weird? Are we good? Are you getting a food coma or anything on this stuff? It's a little weird to look at this stuff, but we have to run the numbers to see how your cash flow is. So roads. Y'all are taking out bonds to pay for your roads, and you actually have a very, very prudent bond program to do this stuff. But your taxes still have to pay off that bond payment. And the thing that's scary about roads is this, it should be a little sign to you that when you have to bond out to pay for infrastructure, you're going to have to bond out to pay for fixing it again. That means that you can't currently afford it inside your general fund. Here are all your roads as a chart. One of the things that we noticed here was a flip. The orange is arterial roads, the big roads that go out into the countryside. The yellow is your city roads, the stuff that you have inside your city network. And in 1940, you essentially flipped from an arterial collection of roads to a local collection of roads. That's when we started suburbanizing. So looking at your model, you started building out into this stuff. You started building more infrastructure that you have to pay for. So here's your valuation model over time. And you say you keep yourself pretty compact until World War II. And then all of a sudden, like, boom, here you go crazy. You're spreading out into the landscape. You're consuming more land. You're also building more infrastructure and bringing you lower value in the process. That's the problem that you're going to have, is a reoccurring situation that your grandparents created. So when you look at your roads over time, you start to see, this is just snapshots of where you were and the amount of square linear miles of roads you have. You go from 170 linear miles to 400 linear miles. When you buy more stuff, it costs more to fix. So here's the weird thing. Anybody wants to get into municipal finance, your finance documents for your city has this thing called a CAFR standard, and they list asphalt as assets. When we sit down with finance officers, this is the first thing that we question, is why do you follow that? In my world, in business, my computer is an asset. If you had a delivery vehicle it's part of your business, those are assets. If you had buildings, those are assets, right? When we first started doing this, we were sat down with the finance officer for Lafayette, Louisiana, and we asked Lori, we said, why do you do this? And she's like, well, they're assets. And we asked her, can you pick your roads up and can you give them to Baton Rouge? And she goes, no. Can you give your roads to Springfield? No. So those are liabilities. When you change that one question, you see a totally different city all of a sudden. So looking at all of your assets, your bridges, we know who crosses them, we can send you a bill for them, things like this. 9% of your system are in these danglers. That's not a network, that's a driveway. So the public is funding these 7 people to have a driveway right there. Why is that a road? So this is a question you should ask yourself. That's 9% of your system is essentially privatized. But y'all are picking up that tab. Is that what you all decided to pay for? Is that high on your priority of social problems for your community to give people a driveway? Or is homelessness? Have a conversation about that. When you look at your roads pre and post World War II, yellow is what was built before World War II before 1950, and green is after. You've built 78% of your system since the 50s. We've checked your population. You've obviously grown in population in green, but the gap between your roads and your population is actually greater than when it was in 1960. You are still more suburban than you were in 1960. With all the strides that you're doing, and I'm not trying to knock you down because you guys are actually doing you're in great shape compared to a lot of cities that we see. So here's your roads over time. Here's all the roads that y'all built, and you're sitting out here in 2019, and you're like, we're golden, we're not building any more roads, Joe, we're fine. So actually that's not true. There are roads that were built in 1979 that you're replacing right now. And it's not just those roads, that's the first rebuild of all of those roads. When you build a road, it has to be rebuilt every 40 years. You also have roads in 1939 that got rebuilt in 79, and you're rebuilding those. You also have a second rebuild cycle you're living through, and you're about to walk into a third rebuild cycle. This is something you have to solve. If you're already taking out loans to pay for this stuff, you're going to have to keep doing that. And if you notice what happened here, that's a bump, right? Well, that is here, and then it gets bigger, and then bigger. It starts capitalizing on itself over time. Is this too depressing? If you're not talking about the things that you can measure, this is all your data. We're not guessing on this stuff. This is stuff you can go into a department, you can go into a document, you can put it on a map and see it. Pipes, stormwater, you've got sheet flow. This building is impervious, right? This building's paying more taxes than a surface parking lot. This is Cleveland. This is a building, here's a surface parking lot. Both of those are impervious. This one pays more taxes than that one. Why do we charge them the same in impervious surface? Shouldn't we want a reward for people that produce taxes? But yet when we do these things, we only tend to think of them as closed loop systems without seeing how they're connected. But this is the sheet flow. The mall is pretty much 100% impervious, and so are the downtown buildings. This building that we're in right now, the rain doesn't pass through us. It's going into a pipe. But we're getting so much less sheet flow out of the downtown versus that. So look at the capacity and see the land use and how it affects things. And what about these things, the roads? That's impervious surface. So y'all have about 3.3 square miles of roads. Josh went ahead and turned it into a big parking lot, so that's that land area size of all of your roads. Who's paying the cost of that impervious sheet flow? Anyone? No one is. That's being baked into the system. We're not sending a bill to the city. So those folks that have more road to get to their house should be paying a higher stormwater fee because they need more road to get to their house. This is all connected. You have enough roads to go from Eugene to San Francisco. Did y'all know that? Josh did a millennial day, a day kind of a UFO of your roads floating over your city. That's a lot of asphalt that y'all have. So you have surface parking and buildings downtown. This is all sheet flow of impervious surface. The mall looks like this, which is kind of crazy. And just be aware of this stuff. But also be aware of the cash flow. So the buildings that you have about 900 square feet of building per person in Eugene, and you have about 450 square feet of parking per person. So y'all, every single person in here has 1.3 parking spaces dedicated to yourselves across the city. Well, when you look at the tax system, the tax assessor is going to go out and put a price tag on the value of that stuff, right? So the average building is pulling about $66 a square foot of value. Parking's only about $9 a square foot. The road that you all have to pay for is pulling about $24 a square foot. So let me ask you a question. Do y'all remember the public meeting that you all had where you said we're going to subsidize parking and we're going to put that into the system? Do you remember that vote? What was the vote on that? Was it a 5-2 vote? This is 7 times more potent than this. The cost of this is the same in front of that as it is here. So you're essentially charging parking 1/7 of taxes that you charge a building. That is a subsidy. Just write it down. Make sure that you pay attention to that. So looking at the city this way of just those commodities, those ingredients, here's your whole city land area as a box. This is how much of that land area you're covering with those uses. So you have about 5 square miles of building, 2.7 square miles of parking, 3 square miles of road, and 23 square miles of everything else. When you look at the numbers of what they're worth, here's how it looks. You essentially have a liability of $600 million for your roads, and your parking is only pulling a value of $245. This isn't giving you much anything from a valuation standpoint. So you're getting all of your cash flow out of buildings to cover that cost. Is that the best use of your money? Or, if you look at the stormwater system and you see your stormwater system costs you all $450 million, what if we were a little bit more aggressive about our density? What if we were a little bit more prudent about our footprint environmentally, and we did half the building footprint? Maybe we did a little bit more taller buildings and kind of shrink ourselves in a little bit and do less roads and parking. If you do that, if you cut your area of this in half, you cut that number in half. What if you could save yourselves $200 million? Or the other question to ask, do you have a better use of $200 million than pipes? These are choices y'all should make. It's all spatial. This joke only works for people over the age of 35. A real simple way of looking at it is your wastewater system. You've got a district up here. All these yellow boxes are lift stations. That's where you have to lift your waste uphill to get it into a pipe. This neighborhood has a lot more lift stations than this neighborhood. So shouldn't those things be geospecific? Shouldn't you just have, if you want to live in that neighborhood and have that lift station, you should pay for it. Why is she paying for your lift station? Just be aware of this stuff. Pipes, I'll take 2 neighborhoods. This is downtown. Here's a neighborhood just southeast of downtown and just southwest of downtown. When you look at their infrastructure, you have half the dwelling units here versus here, yet you have double the length of pipe here versus here. So that's about 16 feet of pipe per person in this neighborhood, 4.5 pipe per person here. When you look at the tax value, you're getting so much more value out of this than this, about 1.5 times more. And when you look at the replacement cost of that pipe, this is $6 million worth of infrastructure. This one only has $3 million worth of infrastructure. You're getting more value, it costs you less, and it's more efficient. This stuff is all geospecific. So this is what your city looks like as a cash flow. If we were to take your city and float it in a lake and see where your money's coming from and see where you're spending it, this is what it looks like. So let's kind of zoom in. So if you're to net this against this, so this is what we do in business. There's stuff that costs money and there's my revenue, and I have to net my revenue against my expenses and make sure that I stay in business, right? This is what the net is of your model. Net positive is in black, net negative is in red. Here's your whole city in 3D, where you can see where your money's coming from and where it's going. And if you take this model and kind of flip it upside down and look as if you were a worm, this is the bottom. You essentially have a death by 1,000 cuts in your community. It's all small, little, teeny little cuts that add up and aggregate. This is the reason why you can't afford your roads inside your general fund. Most cities are essentially financially insolvent, and we see this in a lot of places. But saying this, you're still not as bad as we've seen in a lot of places. So your buildings, your single-family housing, is essentially a net loser of $1,400 per house, per acre. So just be aware of that. That's just a cost. That's what we all want to live in single-family housing. Well, great, there's a cost to that. This is when you get higher density, you start to get net positive, less infrastructure per unit, basically. And when you densify, you get even more net positive. Mixed use, 2.5 thousand per acre. This building here, this has been with you for almost 100 years, producing that. That's awesome. That's a long-term investment for you all. And then there's this. And then these buildings. Now, when you add the police services, this one goes negative, but this is done kind of just a little bit positive. Here's downtown. What's kind of interesting here when we're doing this, this building is almost as dense as that building. Floor area ratio is your density. This building is 5.4, this one's 5.7. There are actually more jobs in this building than that one. Would you have thought that? Don't let your biases get in the way. Just because you see a big building, don't necessarily think that it's killing it. It's doing great, but it's not as, I mean, you can do a lot with a little. So this is your Brady Bunch slide deck if you want to see it. This is what it is. These are your numbers. So where do you go from here? So from our perspective, it's great that you're being transparent about this stuff. It's great that you're running these analytics, but you have to do stuff with this. The green is the roads that you can afford, the yellow is not. Josh flushed your money into the system starting in downtown and sent it out, and you essentially can afford about 70% of your roads. So you essentially run out of money in Mendocino. And that's the situation that you're in. When you go to your council and you ask for things, be aware this is what's going on in the back of their mind. They need to find revenue somewhere to pay for this stuff. You're in awesome shape compared to Lancaster, California. We're doing their project right now. They're the same size as you. They're 160,000 people. They would kill to have your downtown. We colored your model at their histogram. Look at how much more of a downtown you would have if you dropped it into Lancaster. Look at how paltry their downtown is. They have one building 3 stories tall. They know they're messed up. Their strategic document for their city starts with Machu Picchu in Detroit, and it says, how are we any different? They know they're collapsing because they have 75 square miles of land versus you, so you're actually much more contained, but that means they have more roads per person. They have double the roads per person, less peak value in their model, and less total value. So they're the same population. You all are 13 billion, they're 9 billion. That's scary. You have great plans. You already have a fee reduction area. Take it to the next level. Other Oregon cities do this thing called a transportation utility fee, kind of modeled after the same thing. We've heard from your staff that you actually have already considered this before. Bring that conversation forward again. You're going to have to make some tough choices. I'm just going to give our own little bias here. We're from North Carolina. You all have urban growth boundaries. This is how you guys have grown in your community. And we hear how great urban growth boundaries are in Oregon, so we're like, all right, we'll measure it. So here's what you've grown in your developed land, and here's your boundary. It just seems to me that you keep on expanding your boundary. You don't necessarily think of it as a fixed commodity. So this is your growth after World War II, and you've expanded your edges, which is when you've adopted your growth boundary in 1972 for the state, and then y'all came in 10 years later and dropped yours in. So we wanted to do a quick test as like, how prudent have you been with your boundary? Well, this is what you've done since then, right, in growth. So we looked at your 1920s. Your great-grandparents grew as a community. So you see that growth right here, right? They grew at 143% in population. This is the land that they chewed through before the Depression, right? Or actually through the war. That's what they consumed in their waistband. Put it up here, y'all have grown 20% more in population, but you've grown 3 times more in land area. So even though after you adopted your growth boundary and these growth standards, smart growth, all of this stuff, you still have this habit that's going on inside your land consumption. So measuring your land and hearing that inside your boundary you have 2% of land that's vacant, that's actually not good. You need more supply. But let's ask a different question. Can we ask the model where the dirt is worth more than the building on top of it? So that means it's financially upside down for you all. You're paying more in services than it's paying in taxes. That's about 16% of your community. So you have some of that downtown even. Y'all need to collectively get together and make this a priority, or these are the sites that we need to work on and get them active. Find a way to make them active. So things like this, the vacant buildings, the vacant lots, this stuff's bleeding you. I like that this guy's got 2 fire hydrants. That's awesome. So 80% of your land use is single-family detached. That's crazy. But it's what we've done to ourselves as Americans since the war. This is how we've behaved. And we were talking about this with the staff, and I was kind of a little upset that the meeting was going late, and I was like, I've got to get on a mountain bike ride because I had a cheeseburger. And for me, when I eat a cheeseburger, because of my health issues. I need to go do a mountain bike ride afterward, and I need a salad, right? I have to balance myself. Think about your diet of land use and how to balance it. You're going to have controversial discussions. You're going to have compromises, but you have to find a way to balance that land use. You have to deal with this. This is your data. So out here is Crescent Village. You see that up there? Why not do more of that kind of out here? Do some infill in the city, but also build out some wealth in your community. So if your downtown's killing it, find a way to fit more spikes in here. But also, let's say we're going to do half of what's going on the other side of the university over here, here, and here. It's like, how do you cultivate more wealth? I'm not going to say everybody needs to move out of single-family housing. That's just kind of silly. But find a way to balance yourself. So we see our roles as geo-accountants. We're just going to put this stuff on a map and let you all make decisions. The same way your accountant. Your accountant doesn't care if you buy a boat, right? Your accountant cares if you can afford a boat. So y'all are worth more than the trailblazers. You're about like, what, 8.7 trailblazers? I can guarantee you that Miss Allen knows Damian Lillard's towel bill. I can tell you that cups in our nightclub cost 5 cents a pop. You should understand what a pipe in a road costs, right? Do the math on that stuff. We put it on a map for you so you can have fun with it. So yeah, do your math. Thanks.
So we have a half hour for questions, and I have the mic, so I'm just going to do my best to get around to those who have questions, and Joe will do his best to answer them.
First of all, Joe, thank you for coming today. It was a great presentation. My name is Chad. I'm from IDX. I have a question about growing in the downtown core. Obviously, you're promoting denser population, and we're kind of at a struggle right now in Eugene with parking and transportation. And I'm wondering what you've seen with kind of building parking. How do I grow my business from 75 to 150 in 3 years if I can't park them anywhere?
Yeah.
And then having maybe the city pay for that, or encouraging private investment of that and developing on some of the lots we have. And there's only so much land downtown. I'd love to get your take on that.
And I've got an answer for you. So this is just doing an x-ray of your impervious surface, and you can see all the surface parking lots in there. And then looking at the value of the parking in the, let's just look at that one question. This is what the valuation of parking looks like. What's kind of cool about this is your mall is actually pretty valuable. It's parking, more than what we see in like strip malls out here. So this is one where you can say, okay, well, the reverse is also true. That means there's a subsidy for that suburban parking. This also shows the value of the urban parking. So it's already, there's high demand there, and for anybody that's got a vacant parking lot or a surface parking lot in downtown, they probably already know this because they're probably already selling permits for people to park there, and they're cash flowing their taxes off that. There's really no financial incentive for them to do anything else because they're making enough money on the parking. So, well, why don't you do that collectively as a city? It's fun having Harry here. This is a project that two of us worked on in Asheville. So our company had a surface parking lot, and we were approached by a hotel developer to put a hotel on it. We have a nightclub down the street. We knew that people were coming in from out of the city to come to our nightclub. We wanted a place that was close to them, and the price points on this were pretty reasonable. But this is an aloft hotel with housing on the back and then a public parking garage right here. So here's the site. It's still not finished. It's still working on it. But basically, it was a surface parking lot and a hot dog joint. The Hot Dog King was there. I wish I had a picture of the big wiener with a crown on his head, but it's the South. But there it is, right? Nothing to write home about. Yeah, we could cash flow. We didn't need to sell this land or even work on it. We could just kept it going. But it was a good deal for our community because we needed parking on that side of town. We knew because we had a parking lot. So we saw the demand. We were turning people away saying, we don't have parking passes, sorry. So here's the project. Public parking garage, hotel, housing. There'll be a third building that sits here, right? As we were doing the project, the city came back with this legal document. And I mean, Harry understood it. I couldn't understand it. I need to see things. It was like this 58-page legal document, condominium, about the project. I'm like, let's just make a model. So here's what the city owns, right? Fee simple. And then the city goes under our building. This is fee simple here. We're going to pay taxes there, over here, and then down here. There's an access agreement between our building. We're all going to share the fire escape, and here's the hotel. You're essentially wrapping taxes around a non-taxable thing. As you all drive into a public parking garage, realize it's not paying you taxes, right? It's just all cost and no revenue. The same is true of the streets. The streets are just one huge horizontal parking lot. It's just the cars are moving and not stationary. So why is it that we'll subsidize the car moving around and subsidize it when it's parking and not making them pay the net cost? At the very least, the parking taxes should cover the cost of the car moving, right? So this is how we got treated in the newspaper, which was super awesome. We were really frustrated. It took us 4 years to get the permit through, or to get the agreement through the system. And I was talking with one of my friends who's a planner. She goes, Joe, that's great. It only took 4 years to get the project signed. And I was like, Sasha, that was just to sign the agreement. We had to get financing, construction drawings. You know how many human beings my wife and I can produce in 4 years? 5. We can make 5 people. That's not fast in our world. But this is the taxes produced on the property back then. Here's what they pay now. And it's still not done. There's going to be a third building right here, right? So that's a 2,900% growth in taxes on that property. Or another way of looking at it, here's what 11,500 looks like next to 300,000. This is good for our community. So, okay, Joe, hey, this is crazy. I could just put my money in NASDAQ. So if you put your dollar in downtown, it grew by 2 over that 10 years. Here's NASDAQ. But here's what our community's taxes did on this property. This is the growth that we grew for our community. And it solved a problem. So these are conversations you can have. If you know the demands there, find a way to do a cooperative development and get some needs met in your community and leverage that investment to yield return for our community. So this is going to be paying off its bond in year 8. It's a 20-year bond. So from year 8 to 20, it's all gravy. And this project actually helps to subsidize our transit system too. So it's, again, have an open conversation about this and try to shoot for good community goals.
Thanks for your talks, Joe. Supposing that we address this goal of increasing tax yield per acre, as you suggested, net of costs, what are the top 3 policy suggestions that you would suggest for our tax or management policies? Thank you.
Top 3? I generally don't recommend, we tend to be somewhat evasive to that question because it's your community. This is something you all need to wrestle out and talk about what your values are and how to achieve them. What we care about is that you're having an agnostic conversation about the information that you have and try to see the civic role in this. A park doesn't pay taxes, but you need parks. You're going to need affordable housing. You have that problem. So you have to pay for that. The market's not going to go out and produce affordable housing on its own if they can sell that same house to somebody for double the money. That's the way the business works. So you have to be mindful of that. If your needs are affordable housing, homeless issues, and parks, then start there. But you have to see that there's other things that are taking revenue, and you have to put that on the table to have the equal conversation. Is subsidizing your pipes and your roads the top priority for y'all? And if it is, keep doing that. But you have to make that stuff transparent for people to see. From a policy perspective, let's see. One of the things that I've recommended at the planning board is land value taxation. Y'all know land value taxation? Land value taxation came out in the 1800s. Henry George was a tax economist that promoted it, and he basically promoted a uniform one tax. So if you tax on improvement and you improve a property, or if you have a valuable property, if I have a granite building next to your wood building, I'm going to get taxed more than your wood building because I have a granite building. There's more value there. But is that fair? Is that what you want in your community to tax nice architecture? It doesn't mean that I have any more wealth. I just happen to have a stone building. But Henry George thought that was unfair. He also thought it was unfair that the Copleys could step off the Mayflower and have all of this land in Boston. And then when the Europeans came over in the 1800s, they couldn't find land to build on and live in because everybody else owned it. And so they could speculate on that land and do nothing. So he thought if we just tax the improvement value, if you just send a bill to the property for all the investment you put into it as the tax rate, then it'll change the way that land use works. Really simple concept. It spread like wildfire through the country. Everybody got really into the Georgist movement. And Elizabeth Maggie Phillips is a Georgist. She has spectacular eyebrows. And she thought, well, I can't talk to adults. Adults are too set in their ways. They think they've got everything figured out, and they've got biases. I'm going to work with kids. So she invented a board game to teach Georgist theory. Does it look familiar? You know, it's like these are rules that we learn as children, and somehow we just like get amnesia once we get out of college. It's like, how do we not learn this stuff? What's the rules of Monopoly? Location, 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 land assembly, and put buildings on it. That's how you win your community. Incidentally, her game was called the Landlord's Game, and it had a whole other socialist bent to it that was kind of awesome. But Milton Bradley basically stole the game from her and didn't pay her for it. But anyway, the lessons are still there.
Hi, Joe. Thanks again for being back here in our community and sharing all of this information. It's a lot to digest. One thought that is in my mind, we talk a lot about sort of field position as a community, and when we've set these big goals, understanding where we are relative to where we're trying to go to. So could you speak a little bit about some of the different tools that communities use to try to incentivize and migrate their development patterns? And specifically, I mean, in Eugene, we have a tool that we've used downtown and continue to try to use called MUPTI, which is a multi-unit property tax exemption. But could you talk a little bit about that, in particular in the context that we have?
Yeah, I'll show you a bit of a train wreck of a version of that, because it's just a lot. This is the Schadenfreude part of the show. We'll show another community that's a little bit worse off. Leander, Texas, was considering, it's called TERS down there. Every place, they adopt these weird acronyms, and it makes that information more abstract for regular people. We're down here working for probably a couple of days, and everybody's talking about MUPTI and the controversy of MUPTI. And finally, we're just like, well, what is that? And that's all I had in my head was like Elmo with like a butcher knife, like some evil Muppet, because it was so controversial. And it's like, basically it's a tax abatement program. But in Leander, Texas, which is outside of Austin, here's Austin. Leander is out the next county over. They ran a train line out there, and this is suburban sprawl, Texas. These people do not like Austin, even though they all shop and work in Austin. But here's the train station, and you can see how these people deal with the train station. They just drop some boxes around there. It's like, screw it, we're done. But the city's like, we want to make a downtown. Now, they have no history of a downtown in their community because they basically started growing in the 1960s. So here's what they wanted to do. They wanted a tax increment or a TERS to do a main street with a plaza or a park and some infrastructure. It's going to be really expensive for the developer to lay all that stuff out first before they could sell houses, but that stuff would actually benefit them in the long run. It'd benefit the community too. So it's an investment, kind of the way that I invested in my college education. I didn't make money while I was in college. I made it afterward, right? So it doesn't happen overnight. It happens through phases. You can't just go drop a 100-acre village in some place. So it takes time. So here's their community. This is what they're getting. The most potent building is this one little spike right here. It's an architect's office, and everything else is basically sucking wind. It's pretty level. But if you add your downtown, boom, 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 this is what you can cultivate. Now, in your defense, you're Leander, Texas. You don't have a history of a downtown. You're not like your cousins over here in Georgetown and Round Rock that have been around since the 1800s, and they have downtowns, and you can see them there and there. The tallest building in both those downtowns are 3 stories. So you're going to be adding your downtown here, and because you're doing 4- and 5-story buildings, boom, this is what you get. Now, what's crazy is it takes the average value of the entire city from $275,000 an acre to $500,000. You double the value of your city by doing a 100-acre project. So this is how the TERS looks. This is their MUPTI or a TIF or whatever, and this is the investment that you're putting into that project. And what the community saw is you're just giving this developer over here money. It's like, no, you're co-investing into a project. You're going to get yours out of this too. You're actually going to get some as the project starts building. You're sharing the growth in that. It's not just a straight check, it's not a grant, it's an investment. And then you get this bump after phase 2 where it comes online real fast. So yes, you're right, you're not going to get all your money over time. This isn't going to happen immediately. But even midway through the project, you see how the thermometer is already starting to fill up. And it's bigger than anything else that you have even half done. And then boom, it goes up. Now 2 of the counselors were against this. One of them was yelling that she wanted a Costco in some strip mall and Target. She's like, why bother getting in the way? This is the market. I just want a Costco. Like, all right, well, on the left is your Costco and Target and Walmart, and on the right is your downtown. So do you want a $60 million project or a $700 million project? Do you want a 60 or 700? This is your choice. It ended up winning 5-2 because they could see it. So part of this is like making it easy for people to see what's going on and being honest. Y'all are busy. Y'all have lives. You don't have the time to wander through a MUPD document to figure out what's going on. So it should be a community service for transparency that the community needs to deliver a document that allows people to see what's really going on. And if it's a good deal, it's a good deal. But realize, when people see MUPD or TERS or TIF or whatever, they see it as a deal for some developer. And what they don't realize is what your government's doing is trying to level the scales because there's already a deal given to sprawl. We're just not talking about that. Again, you charge me less when I build a cheap, crappy building that consumes more real estate and more of your infrastructure. And if you're doing that, why are you charging people more to do the thing that makes you more environmentally and economically healthy? So that's essentially what you're doing with MUPD, is balancing the scales. Was this too nerdy for a lunch conversation? Are you guys all right?
Thank you, Joe, for coming and talking with us today. As it relates to business growth and housing growth, can you talk a little bit about how increase in taxes and density can contribute or potentially affect public safety?
Increasing taxes could affect public safety. Well, one is if you're increasing the value and gaining more tax base, you have more revenues to commit to public safety if that's your need. Or any public safety, fire services, hire more city attorneys, whatever your needs are, you have more revenue in your system to cover that, right? We get questions about policing services. We didn't run that in this model because there's lots of, policing can go a lot of different ways when you get into a community conversation. In the South, we have neighborhoods that are over-policed. And if you talk to folks in those neighborhoods, they don't want the police department in there as much as the police department's in there. They feel that it's racist or whatever. So we have to be mindful of those conversations going in. But I know that y'all are having a conversation about fees for police in your downtown, and that typically merchants feel that, both the need for the policing and the safety in downtown, but also they're going to be the ones that end up paying for it. I don't know the nuances and details of the conversation that y'all are having with that right now, so it's hard for me to answer.
Okay, I have a question. I think most of our community agrees that additional housing downtown would be positive. We have a situation where our median household income lags the national average by about 17%. And so our community can't pay as high a rents as other communities with higher income. But our construction costs to build new housing is the same as those communities that have more wealth. And so I'm just curious if you're seeing that in other communities that you study, and if there are any recommendations or examples that you can talk about how they are getting over this hump to actually get housing built.
The housing dilemma is it's a national dilemma that's going on right now. A lot of that's capital markets. It's the suppression of mortgage interest that's been going on for over a decade now. I remember talking to my parents about the house that they bought in the 1970s. they were paying 12% interest on their mortgage. You know, that was normal back then, and somehow we've accepted 3% is normal now. Well, that changes how all sorts of other industries respond, because that's a subsidy inside the system, suppression of mortgage interest. That, you know, the cost of a piece of lumber is the cost of a piece of lumber, and that's going up. You have to deal with that. So be honest with your developers and talk with them about the cost of all of this stuff, and hear them out, that they're the ones that are building this the development. If you have all sorts of additional requirements for me in the downtown that you don't have for me out at the edge, where am I going to build? Time is money in my world, right? Not many developers, I know, actually, Harry and I could attest to this, not any developer would sit around for 4 years and wait for this project to move through an agreement process. That's the reason why a lot of developers aren't doing that stuff, because they just can't sit around and pay rent and people's salaries and everything else and just wait for a decision to happen. So your approvals process is an important part of that. Make the stuff that you want easier to get, and make the stuff that you don't want harder to get. So you have to do that. And so, but also there's communities that have open dialogues with infill developers. There's the Infill Developers Alliance. I'd recommend having them to town as well. How do you get the little incremental things that could be local money, local development to happen in the downtown where you can handle bigger projects? How do you allow that process to happen in an expeditious way that you're still getting design improvements in? You know, we talked about the Muppy project that happened in downtown. I mean, I'll be honest, it's kind of ugly. You know, from a streetscape standpoint, from an urban design standpoint, it could be improved. But you need to look at the data to say, did this give us good financial wealth? Did this solve a problem? And divorce that from the design. Design can be changed through good design policy and good design control, and having an honest conversation about what good design looks like. You have plenty of talented architects in the community to talk about that. Josh? Okay, yeah. You have an impact fee reduction zone. Where are you? Where you already allow the developer to reduce the impact fees in areas of your city, including your downtown. These are all your SDCs, your service charges that have come out. But look at the potency of those service charges you're getting out of the downtown per acre versus the service charges out here. So if you look at the policy agnostically, yes, if you build a house out at the edge of town, you're still going to get hit with a service charge, but the potency of that is so much less than what you're going to get out of the downtown. So you're going to get more taxes out of the downtown. So just be aware of that. That's all part of the problem as well. It's all part of the financial calculation the developer's going to do to go into it. And they don't have a money mill in their closet where they can print. You know, Pat used to say this all the time. I don't have a money mill in my closet where I can just print dollars. That all has to be captured out of the housing cost. I can repeat it, yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about how investment in transit maybe increases the value of the roads or increases the value of development in downtowns or core areas?
So the question is, can you show how the value of transit helps add value? The simplest way to think about this is if it's designed properly, you'll see that return pop back out in the adjacent area. I'll show you two examples, and one's not necessarily transit, but the theory is the same, and the modeling is the same, but it's one of the best ones we've got. Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you just take the buildings off the dirt, so there's no buildings in this model. This is just the dirt value per acre, and this is all Hennepin County. It's a little bit light right here, but let's kind of zoom in. Here's a lake. And this is a little town called Wayzata right here. It's like a town of like 12,000 people. Here's downtown Minneapolis. The dirt in downtown Wayzata is pulling about what the dirt in downtown Minneapolis is pulling. It's really kind of bizarre when we saw that. What was fascinating, we're just asking the question, we're like, why is that? So again, there's no buildings, it's just the dirt under the buildings. But when the planners saw this, one of their planners was like, oh my God, you just mapped the ordinance change of 1983. We can now see the results. I'm like, what are you talking about? So they're Minnesotan. They're very transparent. They're very honest. They're very earnest about their stuff. They're also very Swedish about the way that they talk about things. It's all just about data. And so this neighborhood right here, notice how the neighborhood is like a plateau of value, right? Because everybody in this neighborhood has access to a park, a cemetery, and a greenway that runs around both lakes. So they all have a shared amenity, and that amenitized value transferred into the dirt of that neighborhood, right? So everybody has access to that. They changed the ordinance in the county. Up until 1983, all lakes in Hennepin County had to have public access. And then people changed that so that you could privatize the access to lakes. Out in Wayzata, they did that. And you can see how only the few that could afford the edge of the lake cling to the edge of the lake, and that value is not transferred into the neighborhoods. The same is true of transit. When you put that investment into the ground, it should yield value adjacent to it because that amenitized system is there, if it's designed properly, and if you have a zoning that's equivalent to that to allow the trips and capture to be there. The one that we did in, let's see, Auckland, Salt Lake too, yeah. This is Auckland's density. This is their model. And come on now, work for me. Up. So what you could see in their model are these fingers that come out of the downtown. Those fingers are all TOD lines. They're all transit lines that shoot out of the city. And they saw this like saddle that happened right here. They're like, what's going on with this? So we pointed out to them that there's a freeway ramp and a lake that kind of takes that value down. So that was September. We showed them that model. By April, they hired us to take the freeway down. They're like, let's just figure out how to take that freeway down and get rid of that. That's wasting real estate. This was all within the span of 1 year. And so they're like, okay, well, we can model that. We can fill that hole, and we'll do some buildings. And we worked with the local architecture firm. They drew up the buildings. Josh did the analysis of what the value would be, how many people you could put in there, and how to fill that hole. So Auckland is going at the rate of like, San Francisco is embarrassingly slow by comparison. Their prices are going through the roof. They have development pressures because they're like the Manhattan of New Zealand. And they also have crazy growth constraints because they're an island country. But if you do nothing, value will continue to grow. If you do nothing in Eugene, your values will not go down. They will keep going up. So if you add buildings, you can cultivate more value. So here's your taxes growing if you do nothing. If you add buildings, well, you add more value. So you could harvest that to pay for the project. $80 million, they call them rates down there, that's their taxes basically. So, okay, so that was April we started. We were done by April that year. We got a call like 3 or 4 months after that. They're like, okay, we're moving on to project number 2. And I'm like, you guys are already tearing this down? Like, oh yeah. So it's solve those problems and move on to a situation. They're putting affordable housing, all that stuff. They're meeting their community needs in it. But this is a way to do the transit side. Another model is Salt Lake. The county, they have a strong county mayor there, and the mayor hired us to do a value analysis of the whole city if it were a 100% portfolio. So it's Salt Lake culture. This is the way that they operate. They're like, we're all in it together. We're a big shared family. Let's go ahead and try to work together. So the mayor for the county did this analysis for the entire county and gave it to each city. But basically we found that 11% of all of the county's value was in 3% of the land area adjacent to each of the transit stops. So the value is already coming out of those transit stops. And so we just put this theoretical model out there to say, what if all of the governments operated to solve its own needs? Could you use your own assets as part of the project? Could you use some school land or some university land? And it could be just a little piece of it. So let's just take a little piece of the university to do a building on it, to have the conversation with the university here. Is there things where we can work together to solve community problems? But just looking at those parcels and doing modest developments, that's about 40,000 jobs that could be housed there, 23,000 dwelling units, which is about 60,000 people. But what's crazy is, even at a modest level, we're not talking to do wealthy stuff or whatever, but this is $13 billion of opportunity that they're just sitting on. That's the value of your entire city that they have in their TOD corridor area. You know, it's like things like this. This is a truck service area 1,000 feet from a transit stop, and a developer is already showing you what you could have here. So why not just do this building here, 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 and here? It's like that's $80 million. So again, this is where you all could have some leverage to say, well, what do we own where we can be more efficient with a schoolyard or a city property or a county property? Could we do some cooperative development and use our land to get our community needs met? And maybe we take a lower price on that land or a lower rent to get affordable housing or a business incubator or whatever you need. Okay. Yeah.
So you touched on this a little bit, but the value of good materials. So if we talk about it for a building, you could also translate that to a street, right? The use of asphalt versus concrete, metal versus masonry. But as far as the way that that translates for value and value for
This one's going to be a little depressing, but so Charleston, South Carolina. Here's the Charleston 3-county metro model. We told them, we're like, well, you've got an ocean. You didn't make that ocean, so you can't be responsible for that wealth. We're going to go ahead and get rid of it. This is what humans created. And I don't know if y'all have been to Charleston. Charleston's an old colonial city. It actually predates the Declaration of Independence. These people are older than our country, right? So I have a birth date for our country. Here it is. And we have buildings like this, built in 1686. This is older than the United States. This is the oldest liquor store in the country, by the way. It's called the Red Dot. That's a revolutionary getting his drink on. But these are all the buildings that predate the United States, right? Follow me? So 21 acres of these buildings paid in county taxes in 2015, $600,000, right? They paid city taxes and a business improvement district tax on top of that. This is what the county got, $630,000. Out in the county, there's a Walmart that's 21 acres, and this is what it paid the same year. Now remember what I told you about that Walmart. It's going to last 15 years. So these buildings on the right, for 240 years, have produced a high level of capital return to the community. And that Walmart's going to be gone by 2020, maybe 2025. So 13 times the potency for over a century, over 2. So when we talk about value, and this is what happens from an architectural standpoint. If you design a building, well, one, you're going to have to fight the developer because they're going to see that you're putting more expensive materials into something, and you have to argue with them about the longevity of the building and all this other stuff. But there's no financial incentive for them to do that. And then on top of that, they get hit with this carrying cost called taxes every single year where they have to pay more for that. So there's really no incentive for them to do that. But if you think about it and are conscious to it, is there a way to reward the longevity of a building? Is there a way to build a building that would stand for centuries? So, it's better than recycling. It's better than tearing a building down and sending it to the landfill. So there's environmental goals here too. So does that answer your question?
So thank you. And why don't you join me in giving Joe and Josh a round of applause.